In my previous life, my long-prepared wedding was disrupted by my girlfriend's first love. At that time, to appease her first love, my girlfriend asked me to be more understanding, even halted the wedding, and left me behind to go with him. Afterward, they went abroad on a trip behind my back, and I became a laughingstock in everyone's eyes. People mocked me, saying I had been cuckolded long ago. When they returned, unwilling to let it go, I sought them out, demanding an explanation. That moonlight rival smugly told me that my girlfriend actually loved him, and that as long as he refused, my girlfriend and I couldn't get married. He also said that the woman I couldn't win over with all my efforts would kneel and serve him at just a word from him. Even worse, he told me that my girlfriend was already pregnant with his child on our wedding day. I was furious beyond measure and rushed at him, beating him up badly. My girlfriend hurried over, and to stop me, she actually grabbed a fruit knife and stabbed me. Watching her ignore my life-threatening condition and rush to check on that moonlight rival's injuries, my heart turned completely cold. I pulled the fruit knife from my waist, stabbed both of them to death, and finally collapsed from excessive blood loss myself. When I opened my eyes again, I had somehow returned to the day of the wedding. This time, I decisively chose to break up gracefully, wanting them to be stuck together forever. Little did I expect that my girlfriend would later regret it. At the wedding, a man named Julian rushed onto the stage, shouting that he wouldn't allow Yolanda to marry me. He said that if she went through with it, he would die right in front of her, and then tried to pull Yolanda away. Yolanda struggled and tried to reason with him, saying that today was her big day and that they could talk about things later. But Julian kept shaking his head, bringing up their past promises and claiming that Yolanda had once agreed to marry him. Upon hearing this, Yolanda's gaze turned resolute. She turned to me and said that we should postpone the wedding. Though my heart was a mix of emotions, I remained outwardly calm and nodded in agreement. Yolanda looked surprised, clearly not expecting me to agree so readily. She then said she needed to go calm Julian down, and once he was emotionally stable, she would still marry me. I let out a cold laugh, recalling that in my past life, she had said the same thing, only to end up going abroad with her first love and getting pregnant with his child. I told her calmly that if she left, we would be breaking up. Yolanda was taken aback at first, then raised her voice, accusing me of using the breakup as a threat, saying I should be more understanding and that postponing the wedding wouldn't cost me anything. I replied coldly, saying I didn't need her respect. If she left, we were done. I knew that the more I tried to stop her, the more she would insist on leaving. It was the same in my past life. Sure enough, Yolanda glared at me, shouting that we were breaking up and telling me not to regret it. Julian stood by, smugly provoking me, claiming that Yolanda's heart belonged to him. I wasn't provoked. Instead, I walked toward Julian with interest. When I reached him, I suddenly kicked him several meters away, and he collapsed to the ground. Yolanda screamed and rushed to check on Julian, who was howling in pain and crying while clinging to her. Yolanda comforted Julian for a moment, then glared at me angrily, accusing me of hitting him and saying he hadn't done anything wrong. She called me vicious, claiming I didn't see that Julian was unwell. I let out a sneer and retorted, asking her if Julian ruining my wedding wasn't wrong. Yolanda argued back that Julian only cared about her and that I should be more magnanimous. I couldn't stand it any longer and called the security guards to throw Julian out. Yolanda panicked, stopped the guards, and helped Julian, saying she would take him to the hospital. She left a harsh warning, saying that if anything happened to Julian, she would never forgive me. I paid no attention to her threats and quietly watched her leave. Once they disappeared from sight, I scanned the guests present. Some showed sympathy, others looked smug, and a few whispered among themselves. I picked up the microphone and said loudly, "I'm sorry for making a spectacle of myself today. Since the bride has run away, the wedding is over. Everyone, please continue with the banquet. The gifts will be returned. Consider this my treat." After saying that, I couldn't wait to leave. In this life, I didn't care about this wedding, nor about Yolanda. I wanted to call off this marriage even more than she did. That night, I went to a nightclub with some friends to have a good time, putting the wedding and my fiancée completely out of my mind. At the nightclub, I met a girl named Cherry, who was younger, prettier, and had a better figure than Yolanda. She was also my junior from school. She had already known me from the time I donated to my alma mater. Cherry was very proactive, and that very night we went to check into a hotel. Being with her was completely different from being with Yolanda. Every time I wanted to get close to Yolanda, she was reluctant, making all sorts of excuses to push me away, acting aloof, and there was none of the joy that comes with being in a relationship. In my past life, I was truly foolish to give up an entire forest for that crooked tree. The next morning, I was woken up by a call from Yolanda. On the other end of the line, she was yelling, accusing me of playing mind games, saying that if I didn't come to her, I shouldn't expect her to give in. I was stunned for a moment, but quickly figured it out. In my past life, after she ran away from the wedding, I went crazy looking for her, calling her countless times, but she never answered or replied to my messages. Last night, I completely ignored her, and it was probably the first time she had been treated so coldly by me, so she couldn't take it anymore. Some women are like that, they want others to support their decisions, yet they can't stand being ignored. I let out a sneer and coldly told her that we had already broken up, so there was no need for me to look for her. Yolanda, however, refused to acknowledge the breakup, calling me petty and saying that once she had calmed Julian down, she would marry me. I directly refused, telling her that her white moonlight was more suitable for her and that they should just get married. Yolanda insisted that they were just ordinary friends, saying that if there were anything between her and Julian, she wouldn't be with me. At that moment, Cherry, who was sleeping beside me, woke up and coquettishly asked me to sleep a little longer. When Yolanda heard the voice on the other end of the phone, she froze for a few seconds before roaring and interrogating me. I replied coldly, saying she had no right to control me, that we had already broken up. After saying that, I hung up, set my phone to do not disturb, and tossed it aside. At noon, Cherry and I woke up to find many missed calls and 2 text messages on my phone. One was a credit card transaction notification. Yolanda, just like in her past life, had bought a plane ticket and gone abroad. The other message was from Yolanda, saying I had tricked her with dirty tactics and that she wouldn't forgive me unless I gave her a satisfactory explanation. I sneered. I didn't need her forgiveness, it was I who would never forgive her. I immediately blocked her contact, cancelled her credit card, and then went out to eat with Cherry. After parting ways with Cherry, I contacted my lawyer and, accompanied by my bodyguards, went to Yolanda's house. Yolanda's parents were more welcoming toward me than before. Yolanda's mother said what happened yesterday was an accident and that Yolanda would return in a while and continue with our wedding. Yolanda's father chimed in, saying there was nothing between Yolanda and Julian. They didn't look the least bit anxious, as if running away from the wedding was no big deal. This is my fault. In the past, I always gave in to Yolanda's every request, and whenever there was a conflict, I was the one to back down. In their eyes, this runaway bride incident was just a minor disagreement, and they believed I would eventually swallow my pride and beg Yolanda to come back. But this time, they were wrong. With a cold face, I said the wedding was off, demanded they return the betrothal gifts, and told them the house they were living in was mine, giving them until the end of the day to move out. Yolanda's mother screamed that it was impossible to return the bride price, and Yolanda's father also shook his head in disagreement. I sneered and said that since she had run away from the wedding and the relationship was over, the bride price had to be returned. Yolanda's father said that Yolanda had only left temporarily and would return soon. I coldly said that I didn't need his agreement, this was just to inform them. I also said that not only did they have to return the bride price, but they also had to move out of the house. Yolanda's parents exploded. Yolanda's mother pointed at me and accused me of rebelling, threatening to tell Yolanda and make her see my true colors. Yolanda's father was also furious. I found it amusing and told them to explain everything to Yolanda right now. Yolanda's parents each tried calling Yolanda, but neither call went through, and they began to grow anxious. I sneered and said there was no need to call. Yolanda and Julian were already on a plane abroad, eloping while running off with another man. I wasn't going to wear that green hat. Yolanda's father quickly urged me not to misunderstand, and her mother nervously pleaded for me to wait until Yolanda returned before making any rash decisions. I shook my head and scoffed, saying there was no misunderstanding. It was completely over with Yolanda. I ordered them to return the bride price and move out of the villa. With that, I signaled my bodyguards to take action. Yolanda's father and mother were thoroughly enraged, shouting loudly, accusing me of being heartless and vowing that Yolanda would not let me off when she returned. I don't care about their threats at all. They said they'd sue me if I didn't return the bride price. They kept cursing me, calling me a lazy rich second generation, saying Yolanda was lucky to have me, and that without her, I'd never marry such a good woman. I couldn't be bothered to listen to their nonsense. I had the bodyguards throw their stuff out. They threw tantrums and hurled insults, but I didn't care at all. I no longer pampered Yolanda like I used to. My parents died early in a car accident, leaving me starved for love and family. After getting together with Yolanda, I treated her as my only family. Loving her meant loving her family too. I gave them a villa to live in and arranged jobs for them at my company, hoping to have a complete family. But instead of being grateful, they grew more and more contemptuous of me, endlessly demanding, thinking I was the one who married up. Now I've woken up. I'm taking back everything I gave them. I'm done supporting these ingrates. After driving away Yolanda's parents, I went to the company and had HR fire all of Yolanda's relatives. After getting together with Yolanda, she asked me to arrange jobs for all her relatives in the company. I tried to give them easy positions. They were basically just collecting paychecks for doing nothing. The company was the asset my parents left me. I rarely go there, leaving it to professional management. I just stay home and collect the money, enough to last several lifetimes. After doing all this, on my way to meet Cherry that evening, I received a call from an unknown number. I had a feeling it was Yolanda. After hesitating for a moment, I still answered. On the other end of the phone, Yolanda furiously accused me of being cruel to her family, saying that canceling her credit card was a way to force her hand. She demanded that I reactivate the card and bring her parents back, claiming she would give me another chance. I hung up directly and blocked that number. If Yolanda could travel abroad, so could I. The next day, Cherry and I flew off to the Maldives for a good time. For the following month, I stayed overseas, traveling with Cherry, enjoying the scenery, eating and drinking, and having a great time at night as well. Cherry knew how to please me. Although I knew she was with me for the money, I was happy. It was just a matter of mutual benefit. Yolanda spent money lavishly, buying luxury goods as if they were free, and even said that money was meant to be spent. She spent a lot of my money but never thanked me. Cherry was different. Whenever I gave her a bag, she would thank me profusely and repay me in every way possible. That day, I received a message from Yolanda saying she wanted to have a serious talk with me when I returned. I didn't reply and went back a week later as planned, refusing to change my itinerary for her. Over the following week, Yolanda sent several more messages, this time with a hostile tone, but I ignored them all. I also received news from home, learning that Yolanda had tried to seize the villa with her family but was chased away, and that she had caused a scene at the company only to be taken away by the police. I found it all as amusing as a funny story. From the airport to my doorstep, Yolanda, having somehow gotten wind of my arrival, showed up with Julian. The moment we met, she confronted me, demanding to know why I hadn't answered her calls, replied to her messages, or reached out to her. I'm speechless. She still hasn't faced reality and still treats me like a simp. Before I could respond, she spotted Cherry and immediately demanded to know who Cherry was. I pulled Cherry close and told Yolanda that she was my girlfriend, that we had broken up long ago, and that I hadn't contacted her because I didn't want Cherry to get jealous. Cherry played along cleverly, pressing herself against me in an intimate way. Yolanda was completely furious and shouted at me, saying she wouldn't allow me to be with another woman. I sneered and told her she didn't have the right to approve anything, she had no idea who she really was. Yolanda's face turned red with rage. Julian chimed in sarcastically, saying I had found a fake girlfriend just to make Yolanda jealous, and called me a coward for using such low tactics. Yolanda believed it and resumed her haughty demeanor, accusing me of playing mind games, looking down on me even more, and saying she had misjudged me. I shook my head in speechless mockery, saying Cherry was prettier, gentler, and more sensible than her. Why would I give up a beautiful woman for a second-hand one like her? I'm not stupid. Yolanda flew into a rage and ordered me to kneel down and slap myself. I sneered as I walked toward her, staring at her and asking if she really wanted me to kneel and slap myself. She said angrily, of course, telling me to learn that some words shouldn't be said carelessly. I slapped her across the face and said she dared to make me kneel. Yolanda was dazed from the beating. When she came to, she looked at me in disbelief, saying I actually dared to hit her. I sneered and said hitting her was the least of it, telling the shameless pair to get the hell out. After that, I called the security guards to kick them out. Yolanda kept shouting that she would never forgive me and that I would regret it. I couldn't be bothered with her, I only regretted not slapping her sooner. Once it was quiet, I pulled Cherry into my arms and said my mood had been ruined, telling her to comfort me properly. Cherry asked with a suggestive tone how she should comfort me. I leaned in and whispered that it should be with what she did best. She punched me lightly, her face full of shyness. A few days later, a lot of slanderous information about me appeared online, calling me a scumbag who had a fiancé yet still went after another woman. They falsely accused me of using my wealth to toy with people's feelings, and even took candid photos of Cherry and me to smear us. Netizens attacked me, but I didn't really care. I'm not a celebrity, so negative news would soon be forgotten. Cherry was very angry, saying it was Yolanda's doing. I smiled and shook my head, thinking it might not be her. Based on my understanding of Yolanda, she is naturally proud and would disdain doing such things. She might still be waiting for me to come back and beg for forgiveness, not bothering to spread rumors about me. I had someone investigate, and the results came quickly. It wasn't Yolanda who did it, but it was related to her, it was her parents, with Julian as the mastermind. I had someone gather evidence, planning to have them all sent to prison. One day, as I was driving out, Julian rushed out to block my way. I got out of the car, looked him over, and sneered, saying he still dared to show up. Julian sneered that having money meant nothing, claiming he could ruin my reputation. I looked at him calmly. I had investigated him, his background wasn't bad, but he had harbored resentment toward the wealthy since childhood, was narrow-minded, and toyed with people's emotions. His outburst at the wedding wasn't because he truly cared about Yolanda, he just couldn't stand seeing me do well. Julian continued to mock me, saying that Yolanda's heart belonged to him, and that as long as he was willing, I wouldn't be able to marry Yolanda, and that there was a surprise in store for me. I scoffed and asked if Yolanda was pregnant. Julian blurted out in surprise, asking how I knew. I smiled without saying a word. He then said that Yolanda was carrying his child, and that even if I married Yolanda, I'd have to raise his child. I replied indifferently that Yolanda was a tramp, and if he wanted her, he could have her, I had no intention of marrying her. Julian didn't believe me and sneered, saying I was pretending and that I was still Yolanda's simp. He even taunted that Yolanda was a worn-out shoe I couldn't even wear, and that he could have his fun with her without any responsibility. I smiled and told him he had made me angry that I hadn't beaten him up sooner. With that, I threw a punch at his face, and he fell to the ground. He looked at me in shock and anger, about to say something, but I gave him another beating. Once I felt satisfied, I called for the bodyguards and took him to find Yolanda and her family. I arrived at Yolanda's family's rented house. Yolanda wasn't there, but her parents were. Yolanda's father pointed at me and cursed angrily, while her mother resentfully demanded that I kneel, kowtow, pay compensation, and return everything double, saying that perhaps then they would forgive me and persuade Yolanda to marry me. I was speechless. They didn't notice that I had brought bodyguards and the injured Julian, thinking I had come to admit my mistake. I didn't bother with nonsense and simply said I had called the police. They had been spreading rumors about me online and were about to go to jail. As soon as I finished speaking, the sound of police sirens rang out. Yolanda's father pretended to stay calm, saying I was just trying to scare them, but when the police showed up, they got scared. After the police understood the situation, they were about to take them away. Panicking, they shouted that they hadn't broken the law, claiming I had ruined them, and said Yolanda wouldn't let me off. Just as the police were about to escort them out, Yolanda returned. She stopped the police and yelled at me, saying I was crazy and that I had no right to harm her family. I coldly replied that they had harmed me first. Yolanda retorted that her parents had a moment of confusion and that I shouldn't hold it against them, saying I wasn't a man and was petty. At that moment, Yolanda saw the injured Julian and furiously ordered me to kneel, or else I could forget about her forgiveness. I coldly said she didn't understand the situation, it was now up to me whether I would forgive them. Her parents spread rumors, and Julian was the mastermind. They committed a crime, and they're going to prison for sure. No one can change that. Julian and Yolanda's parents panicked and told Yolanda to figure something out. Yolanda's face turned pale. She bit her lip and admitted defeat, agreeing to marry me and forgive everything I had done, saying that this matter would end here. I stared at her in shock, let out a scornful laugh, and shook my head, saying I had no idea what was going on in her head. Yolanda angrily asked what more I wanted, saying she had already made concessions. She mentioned that her parents were anxious, Julian cared about her, and that if I loved her, I shouldn't stop others from caring about her. She accused me of overthinking, which led to the current situation, and asked if I didn't think I was at fault. I sneered and said they were such good friends that they had even shared a bed. Yolanda furiously argued back, but I stared at her coldly and said she still wouldn't admit it even now. I asked her where the child in her belly came from. Yolanda's face turned pale, but she still refused to admit it. I let out a cold snort and took out my phone to play the video of Julian coming to find me. After watching the video, Yolanda could no longer remain calm. I sneered and said that her best friend treated her like a worn-out shoe. Yolanda looked at Julian in disbelief, and Julian nervously tried to explain. I couldn't be bothered to watch the drama, so I left gracefully, leaving the rest to the police. After Julian and Yolanda's parents were arrested, I hired professionals to clarify the truth online, posting everything about Julian causing a scene at the wedding, Yolanda fleeing the ceremony, and what they had done. Public opinion shifted, and everyone condemned Yolanda and the others. Yolanda set aside her arrogance and apologized to me, saying she knew she was wrong, that she would cut ties with Julian, had aborted the child, and wanted to marry me, promising to listen to me from now on and make up for her mistakes. I coldly said that I wouldn't want her, a worn-out shoe that Julian had already worn. Yolanda panicked, saying I was bewitched by Cherry and that I had never treated her like this before. I sneered and said Cherry was 100 times better than her, I had been so good to her, yet she was an ungrateful snake. Yolanda said she knew she was wrong and wanted to start over. I shook my head and said I had already started over long ago, and there was no place for her in my new life. With that, I had someone throw Yolanda out. The matter between Yolanda and me went viral online. Netizens dug up more scandals about Yolanda's family, and she became a pariah. Too proud to bear the public opinion, she called me, but I didn't answer. The next day, I heard she had committed suicide. I didn't feel much, her life or death had nothing to do with me. Yolanda's parents and Julian, due to my pursuit of justice, would go to prison and have to pay me a huge sum in damages for reputation loss, never able to recover in this lifetime. On the third day, Cherry and I continued our carefree life, and she even introduced her best friend to me. In this life, I don't believe in love, nor will I be tied down by women. Living freely and enjoying myself is what truly matters.